increase its revenues or reduce its expenditures, which means it must actually tax people, right? So if it taxes people, people will have less money in their pockets, so by definition, their demand will come down. So if their demand comes down, their manufacturing sector or the services sector, which already has a debt, has to sell its products of both goods and services to people who will be spending less than before. But how will the private sector or corporate sector actually reduce its debt if it can't sell to its own people? The only option then is to sell it abroad. So what I'm trying to get at, and that is where I will develop the link with Pakistan, that the only way to settle this now is for governments to reduce their debt, the private sector to reduce their debt. The only option is for them to begin to reduce their external deficit, which means they must run, as we all know, current account surpluses or trade surpluses, which means someone else must buy your goods and services. And if everyone, half the world, and if Europe in particular, which is the second largest economy, if you look at Europe as a whole, the largest economy in the world, trying to sell its products, who will they sell it to? Someone else must buy the products for them to lower their debt levels. Which means China, the rest of Southeast Asia, someone must buy the products of goods and services. Which the link with Pakistan should be fairly obvious. If there is a crisis out there, what will that mean to those of us here trying to reduce our trade deficit? Here are these guys trying to sell to the same markets, because you won't be able to sell there. We also have to find markets. So just try and imagine what it means to us going forward, okay? And the fiscal effort that is required is far too big. So what will these countries do? Abandon the Europe? Print their own currencies like we do? More photographs of Mr. Jinnah? To meet their obligations? So that's the first one. So Europe has a fairly simple choice. Either someone else must buy your goods and services, or other people must take your hit, or you get out of the Europe and print your own currencies and hope for the best. Analysts claim that part of the problem is that they had a monetary union but no fiscal and political union, because countries were running their own economies in terms of the fiscal side, and because they didn't have a political union, this monetary union didn't work. Perhaps there is a great deal of truth in it, but that doesn't explain Japan, doesn't explain UK, doesn't explain the US. And let me share with you some statistics, for example, of Japan, one of the least understood countries in terms of the nature of the problem. And I'm emphasizing all this because here we are looking towards the world to help us out, okay? Japan has been under deflation after the equity and land bust bubble since the 1990s. The public debt has exploded, and there is a collapse of revenues. The debt to GDP ratio in Japan is more than 230%. It is like Zimbabwe, Sudan, and Egypt. Okay? The debt in Japan is 15 years of its tax revenues. It will take half a generation to pay off the debt. The debt is twice as high as the next highest debt in history, and that was Britain after the World War II. It is borrowing half of what it spends. Its borrowings every year are more than its tax collections. Borrowings are more than its tax collections. And a 1% increase in interest rates will mean 10% of tax revenues. Similarities with Pakistan, I will come to in a moment. The deficit is 7% of GDP, and you will be pleased to know by the end of this year, ours will cross 7% of GDP. And as I've argued the other day in a piece that I wrote, that we will have to learn to live with, because of structural issues, a deficit of more than 6%. In fact, this year it will be 7.5%. Next year, my estimates suggest the same. To give you an example, for